The tale commences in an era when martial cultivation was merely in its infancy, a time when monstrous fiends and demonic entities erupted from countless spatial rifts, threatening the very existence of all life on Earth and plunging the world into utter chaos. Yet, in the heart of this pandemonium, Ling's consciousness journeyed across the fabric of time and space, flinging him 10,000 years into a future dreamscape, a world decimated by a colossal catastrophe, leaving behind only the skeletal ruins of a once great civilization. This new world was teeming with monsters that poured endlessly from the rifts, and all traces of humanity had long since vanished. But even in this era where mankind was at its weakest, one man stood tall, a figure of immense power and unyielding spirit. He confronted a gargantuan beast with perfect composure, pure energy radiating from his very form. The creature resembled a titanic centipede, so massive its body seemed to scrape the heavens. The man's eyes ignited with a brilliant light as he settled into his stance to face the behemoth. With a single, fluid motion, he executed a lightning-fast attack, unleashing a cataclysmic strike against the monster. This incredible, heaven-defying blow simply vaporized everything in its destructive path. He was the very image of a supreme martial arts master, a man who becomes strongest even in a ruined world, with a mystical aura glowing from his being. But have you ever awakened from one nightmare only to find yourself trapped within another? Ling, a sharp voice detonated in his ears like a clap of thunder. Ling glanced up in a daze, his face a canvas of pure bewilderment from being so abruptly woken. His classmates immediately erupted into laughter, mocking him for his perpetual habit of sleeping in class. The middle-aged instructor at the podium adjusted the glasses on his nose and glared at him with an intensity that bordered on pure hatred. We have just over 200 days until the college entrance examination, and you can't even be bothered to study for it. Instead, you have the nerve to sleep in my class. With an attitude like that, even if you manage to graduate, a construction site wouldn't hire you to move bricks. Tell me, do you have any idea what the minimum blood standard is for cement workers these days? Ling mumbled back, "Teacher, it's 0.8. The teacher sneered, "And has your blood Chi value even reached 0.8 yet?" Ling lowered his head, massaging his throbbing temples as he dutifully absorbed the teacher's verbal assault until the class was finally dismissed. While the other students filed out, the heavyset boy seated in front of him turned around and asked, "Having those nightmares again?" This was Lu Shiming, one of the few people Ling would call a friend. Ling could only offer a silent nod, but the utter helplessness in his eyes spoke volumes. For 3 days straight, the very same dream had relentlessly haunted him. Ling found it impossible to describe the dream, remembering only the dilapidated scenery and the overwhelming sense of desolation and depression it caused. He saw himself standing bewildered in a vast wilderness, surrounded by roaming monsters. It was a nightmare, of that there was no doubt, and its after effects were devastating. He was left perpetually drowsy, and his quality of sleep had become unbelievably poor. So even though he was sleeping for more than 12 hours a day, he looked as though he had been suffering from continuous insomnia. The toll was so great that over these past 3 days, Ling's blood Chi value, his BCV, had actually dropped by 0.02, making him feel like the weakest he'd ever been. His mood was, to put it mildly, terrible. In response to Lu Chiming's invitation to an internet cafe, Ling simply shook his head. "No, I'm not going. I'm just heading home." "Home this early? That's not my treat. Let's head to the cafe." "I'm covering everything today," Lu Chiming said with a sincere pat on his chest. He invited him, but Ling simply shook his head and explained, "I really don't feel like it. I just want to go home early and catch up on sleep." "You slept through class all day and you're still tired?" Lu Chiming wore an exaggerated look of disbelief on his face. Ling didn't bother to explain any further. Just as Lu Chiming was about to persuade him again, several other boys called out. They called to him from a distance. Lu Chiming gave Ling a final look but didn't press the issue, instead sprinting off to join the others. The group of boys ran ahead, bustling with energy as they headed for the school's entrance, quickly scattering in all directions. Ling let out a soft sigh as a whirlwind of thoughts began to churn in his mind. He had almost forgotten that fact. He had now been living in this strange new world for 18 long years, and his memories of a previous life had grown incredibly vague. Sometimes, he even wondered if it was all just a long dream, a world without martial arts, where he wasn't constantly ranked among the weakest. It was a world free from terrifying monsters that clawed their way out of fissures in the ground as the setting sun cast a warm glow across the city. Ling finally reached his old apartment building. He pushed open the door to his home to find his dad, Lu Dehai, lying on the arm of the sofa. His mother, Xin Yuan, was carefully tearing open a plaster, searching for a clear spot on Lu Dehai's back to apply it. Ling couldn't help but notice his dad's heavily patched up back, and his eyes stung for a moment. He called out, "I'm home." Despite their own fatigue and injuries, his parents' faces instantly lit up at the sight of him. Ling shook his head and dragged his bag toward his room. Lu Dehai quickly pulled on his shirt, but the bandages underneath were a clear testament to the grueling labor he endured for his family. Ling paused mid-step, turning back to the sofa and whispering, "Why don't you go back and buy a blood Mo Saucin device? That thing can stimulate your blood, relax your tendons, and provide a healing massage for your body. It would be really useful." But his father, ever the proud man, just flexed his bicep and declared, "Hey, what kind of injury is this? I'll be fine in a couple of days. Besides, that's money we should be saving to buy you more tonics." As if on cue, his father took out 2 small bottles and presented them to Ling. It was a new medicine meant to increase his blood value. It cost an incredible $20,000, an amount that was a true fortune for a family like theirs. Overwhelmed by this gesture of care, Ling struggled to keep his tears in check as his parents asked, "How is your blood value these days? Have you managed to break through to 0.85 yet? I saw on the news today that the cutoff for this year's college entrance exam is going up. The requirement for undergraduates is going to be raised by another 0.01. I know. I'm going to my room to exercise now." Ling's chest immediately tightened, the dream that he becomes strongest feeling miles away as he rushed into his room. He closed the door behind him and let out a long sigh of relief. Only within the confines of this small room could he ever truly relax. This was his personal sanctuary. Ling put down his school bag, took off his coat and pants, and then sat down on the worn yoga mat. After taking a moment to calm his mind, Ling took a deep breath and silently recited in his heart, 13th set of radio gymnastics. Begin. In the next instant, Ling's body began to move, posing in one strange movement after another with practiced ease. The movements were somewhat similar to yoga, but they were also profoundly different, making gymnastics the most apt description for his secret training. The Martial Alliance's 24 forms of martial refinement were reputedly crafted by the Grandmasters of the Alliance, drawing inspiration from ancient yoga, classical martial arts, and old-world jiu-jitsu. These forms are considered the perfect foundation for any beginner, the essential first step on the long road where one eventually becomes strongest. This all began over 300 years ago when the world was irrevocably altered, a time when a colossal rift tore through the fabric of heaven and earth. From this chasm, countless grotesque and horrifying monsters swarmed forth, completely derailing the trajectory of human civilization. When it became clear that most conventional thermal weapons were useless against these abominations, humanity was pushed to the brink. We were forced to seek new methods of self-defense, perhaps because the sheer pressure of facing these monsters and the threat of extinction triggered something deep within us, shattering a genetic lock that had long held us back. Suddenly, individual human strength began to soar to previously unimaginable peaks. Martial arts evolved at an explosive pace, transforming with each passing day, yet despite this incredible advancement, on the scorched battlefields where we fought the encroaching hordes, humanity found itself at its weakest. We were at an absolute disadvantage. Every single day, another town or city was lost to the monstrous tide, and the human population continued to shrink. This was the grim history their class teacher would recount to Ling and his peers from time to time. Ling concluded his practice of the body movement exercises, settling onto his yoga mat to regulate his breathing. He had just completed the 24 forms of the body refining technique 3 consecutive times. A fine sheen of sweat glistened on his skin, and his once pale face was now flushed with a healthy red. Still, Ling hadn't discovered the source of his recurring nightmares. As he rested, his mind drifted through a sea of random thoughts, and while lost in contemplation, sleep began to creep up on him like a relentless tide. Ling let out an unconscious yawn, his eyelids growing heavy as his body slowly sank down, and he gradually drifted into slumber. He awoke to a leaden gray sky hanging over blackened earth, with a chilling gray fog clinging to everything. The very air was thick with depression, despair, and utter desolation. This was the first thing Ling saw upon opening his eyes. It was this damn nightmare again. A feeling of complete helplessness washed over Ling as he fiercely pinched the flesh on his arms and face, desperately trying to force himself awake, but it was useless. Until a specific trigger was met, he knew he was trapped here, a prisoner in this recurring horror. Soon, the gray mist to his left parted, revealing a tall and rigid humanoid figure. Its complexion was a deathly gray, its eye sockets were sunken pits, and it possessed no eyes, only a pair of hollow voids that stared into nothing. A long gash marred its face, deep enough to reveal the gray bone and blackened flesh beneath. The zombie lunged at Ling, sending him sprawling to the ground. In all his previous nightmares, Ling's only instinct was to run, to escape, until his consciousness would inevitably fade, and then he would wake up. But this time was different. The zombie had materialized right beside him, leaving no room for escape. The creature opened its ghastly maw to lunge at Ling, but he narrowly dodged the attack. In that moment, something inside Ling shifted. No more running. After all, this is just a dream. Even if it bites me, it doesn't matter. If I die in this dream, maybe I'll just wake up faster. With that thought solidifying in his mind, Ling took the initiative, planting his foot and taking a powerful step forward. Wind God Kick, he roared, shouting the name of a legendary move he'd read about in a novel from his past life. He channeled all his momentum into the strike, kicking the towering zombie squarely in the chest and sending it stumbling backward. Its clumsy frame, thrown off balance by the immense force, couldn't hold, and it crashed backward onto the pavement. A surge of confidence washed over Ling. Spotting a watermelon-sized rock just a few meters away, he seized it and took aim at the towering zombie's head. He recalled from the movies that the head was always the weak point. This had to work. Muttering a prayer under his breath, Ling brought the stone down with all his might, and a sickening crack echoed through the air. The massive rock embedded itself deep within the zombie's face. Its body convulsed twice, then fell completely still. Utterly motionless, Ling's own heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum in the sudden silence. This couldn't be. Enough to wake me up, Ling murmured, turning to leave. But just then, something bizarre happened to the zombie before him. Its form crumbled like sand, rapidly withering away in a matter of moments, leaving behind only wisps of inky black threads. These threads of smoke, rising from the disintegrated corpse, coalesced into the shape of an arrow. It then shot forward, plunging violently into Luing's chest. Stunned, before he could even process what was happening, he felt a searing heat radiate from the point of impact, followed by a torrent of memories that flashed through his mind like a high-speed film. The protagonist of this mental movie was a tall, strikingly handsome teenager. The initial scenes were a monotonous blur of grueling training, the journey of someone who started as the weakest. But then, the tone shifted, becoming grim with one brutal battle after another. Every clash was a maelstrom of violence and loss. The teenager's comrades fell one by one, beneath a sky that was perpetually a bleak, oppressive gray. Sorrow and agony saturated every frame of the memory, which finally settled on the shattered walls of a broken city. The heavens swarmed with nightmarish beasts as a vast ocean of black fog rolled in, threatening to engulf the entire world. In absolute darkness, the sheer despair of that final moment was so profound that even Luing, a mere observer, felt its weight as he slowly opened his eyes, his own mind now clouded with a deep melancholy, as if he'd just finished a tragic epic. What in the world did that guy go through before he died? Luing whispered to himself. There was no question that this flood of images was the memory of the man the tall zombie used to be. But the real question was, why did he inherit those memories just by ending its existence? Was it just because this was a dream? Luing's mind raced with questions, but unfortunately, there was no one around to provide answers. He would have to discover the truth on his own. Steeling himself, Luing refocused his thoughts. Before long, another shambling zombie wandered into his view. This time, however, Luing felt no fear and charged directly toward the creature in the yellow helmet. With a single, fluid motion, he twisted the zombie's head clean off its shoulders. As he stared down at the head that had rolled to his feet like a discarded ball, Luing froze. He stared at his own hands in disbelief. He couldn't believe they were his. When did I get this strong? He replayed the sequence of moves in his mind. It was a path that becomes strongest. It felt as if he'd practiced them thousands of times in live combat, so ingrained that the actions were purely instinctive. He had acted subconsciously. That level of cold, calculated precision was something he couldn't have even dreamed of achieving before. Could it be that I absorbed more than just the memories from that first zombie? He analyzed the situation. If he absorbed the memories, then naturally, he must have inherited the skills as well. It was absolutely unbelievable. Luing sighed, having effortlessly gained the fruits of another man's entire life. What an experience, if only it weren't just a dream. Because it was a dream, any unbelievably bizarre events that transpired seemed perfectly normal. The strange thing was, even though Luing was fully aware he was dreaming, he simply couldn't force himself to awaken. Just then, the zombie he had just dispatched started to unravel as identical arrows materialized from a black line of smoke and seeped directly into Luing's body. He swiftly absorbed this new fragment of memory, but this time, it left Luing feeling somewhat disappointed. The helmeted zombie had merely been an ordinary plumbing repairman before its reanimation. The memories that he found interesting were extremely limited, offering almost nothing. The sole piece of valuable information came from the memory of the helmeted zombie, which revealed that he and the jumpsuit-wearing zombie had originated from the very same place, base 1359. It seems I need to find base 1359. Maybe there I can uncover the truth behind this dream, Luing mused to himself. He had now fully embraced this dream as a puzzle-solving, power-leveling game, where hunting the zombies that roam the wilderness would grant him experience for upgrades and clues to advance to the next stage. As for what these clues pointed to, Luing neither knew nor cared. But at that very moment, a dull thudding sound reached his ears. Bang, bang, bang. With this sound, the world around Luing grew hazy and unstable. Luing slowly fluttered his eyes open, roused by a violent pounding on his door that jolted him fully awake. He struggled to open his eyes, slowly attempting to sit up, when he heard a crisp and icy female voice from the other side of the door. Dinner is ready. How long are you planning to hole up in your room? Luing got to his feet and opened the door. It was the voice of his sister, Luing Ha. Luing could already picture the expression she wore outside his bedroom door. A hint of impatience mixed with her usual coldness. Got it, I'll be right there, Luing answered. Luing Ha had always despised him, her own brother. Their relationship had been much better during their childhood. Luing was about to turn 18 this year, yet his blood chi value was still a pathetic 0.8, making him feel like the weakest in his family. His combat power index and practical combat results were also a complete disaster. But Luing Ha was a different story entirely. Though she had just turned 16 this year, her latest blood chi value test had already soared past 1.0. Her combat power index exceeded 100, and she possessed a remarkable talent for practical combat. If she continued on this trajectory, she was on track to secure a scholarship for a major at a prestigious martial arts university in just 2 years. It was the classic trope, the unremarkable brother and the genius sister. Perhaps in Luing Ha's heart, if she wasn't burdened by her mediocre brother, all of the family's resources would have been poured into her, and she could have already achieved an even more incredible level. At that moment, Luing's mind cleared completely, and he became acutely aware that he had just woken from another nightmare. But unlike all the times before, after this particular nightmare, Luing felt no lingering discomfort whatsoever. On the contrary, his physical condition felt unexpectedly superb. There was no fatigue, no drowsiness. My entire body feels like it's overflowing with energy, Luing thought in astonishment. He tried to recall everything that had transpired in the dream. Ling threw a test punch through the air, even my strength. It feels like it has increased. A few moments later, a shocking realization washed over him. All those memories, the ones I absorbed from the zombies, I remember every single one with perfect clarity. The countless combat skills I inherited, this is how one becomes strongest. They're all deeply etched into my mind. It was a kind of muscle memory, so ingrained that the entire experience felt unbelievable. If Ling's strength had genuinely increased, wouldn't that also mean his blood chi value had risen? Could a dream really be the catalyst for how the weakest become strongest? Ling couldn't wrap his head around it, wondering if it was all a powerful delusion. Of course, the most direct way to verify the truth was to undergo a full physical assessment. Let's eat first, he decided. Then I'll go and find a martial arts training center to get tested. Ling managed to suppress his excitement, quickly tidied himself up, and then stepped out of his room. Once at the table, Ling attacked his food as if he had been starving for days, shoveling rice into his mouth. As he picked up his now empty bowl to hand to his mother, Xuan, for another serving, he suddenly noticed that the other 3 people at the dinner table were giving him very strange looks. It was only then that Ling realized the sheer volume of food he had consumed today was indeed quite excessive. Actually, never mind. I'm full. Ling hesitated for a moment and was about to retract his bowl, but it was promptly snatched away by his father, Lu Di. What's this nonsense? You won't go hungry in my house. Wife, please cook another pot of rice and fry up 2 more dishes. His mother, Xuan, nodded before standing up and heading to the kitchen. Lu Di, on the other hand, looked quite pleased, smiling at Ling as he remarked, boys are always like this when they're going through a growth spurt. They can never seem to get full. It means you're getting taller. Ling nodded his head. How much taller do you think? His sister, seated next to him, scoffed while shoving food into her mouth. Hyun is about to turn 18, she said with a dismissive tone. Immediately after the meal, Ling made a quick excuse to his family and headed straight for the door. He was desperate to test his current stats in every aspect. His destination? The Honan Martial Arts Hall. Ling arrived at his destination by following the navigation on his phone, which brought him to a stop in front of the martial arts hall nearest to his home. The building wasn't very large, and even its decor was completely unremarkable. It was just your average, privately run martial arts hall. The owner of this particular dojo, and Hong Tuan, is a level 4 martial artist who specialized in traditional fist techniques, and he was also one of the top 10 competitors from the 23rd Annual Beihai City Martial Arts Conference. The martial arts hall had an enrollment advertisement posted on the door that Ling happened to notice, according to the standards published by the Global Martial Union. A martial artist with a peak blood chi value over 200 and a combat power index exceeding 100,000 would be classified as a level 4. Ling, who was still considered one of the weakest students at his school, made a rough comparison to an Hongchuan in his head and got a sobering result. As the martial arts level increases, the path one must walk to become the strongest grows exponentially more difficult. A level 4 martial artist, even within the entirety of Beihai City, was considered a distinguished expert with a respectable status. Just inside the front door of the martial arts school stood a reception desk. The receptionist was a young woman of about 20 years old, who appeared quite lovely. Seeing Ling enter, the woman quickly adopted a professional smile and took the initiative to greet him. Is this student here to sign up for our martial arts hall's training classes? Ling shook his head. No. I'm here to test my blood chi value and combat power index. The receptionist's gaze swept over the school uniform Ling was wearing as she nodded. Based on her experience, she could easily surmise that Ling was just another ordinary kid from an ordinary school, from an ordinary family, making him unworthy of her time. Proceed down the hallway to room 8. The testing equipment is waiting for you inside. Surprisingly, the receptionist maintained a professional demeanor, not openly looking down on Ling. The device for measuring blood chi value resembled a luminous crystal orb. Ling approached and raised his hand, placing it upon the sphere, which immediately pulsed with an aura that bathed the entire room in a faint blue light. A soft beep echoed as a value materialized on the screen, a blood chi value of 0.963. Seeing the number, Ling's fist tightened instinctively, a surge of validation washing over him despite having anticipated this result. It was undeniable. His blood chi value had genuinely increased. This proves it, he thought, his heart pounding. Everything I gained in that dream can manifest in reality. This is no longer some fantasy game of slaying monsters. This was true cultivation, the path a man once considered the weakest takes when he decides he becomes strongest. Ling struggled to contain his elation. He had finally found a glimmer of hope, a chance to truly make his mark in the world of martial arts. The excitement was overwhelming. Time to measure the combat power index. The next apparatus was far more imposing, a towering machine nearly the height of a man. Set into its center was a padded impact plate. The test was simple: strike it with everything he had. Ling took a deep, calibrating breath, his arm muscles coiling as he channeled the techniques now etched into his very memory, and unleashed a vicious punch against the device. A moment later, a number flashed onto the display: his combat power index. It had reached 113. Last year, Ling calculated internally the minimum score for the martial arts university. In Beihai City was a blood chi value of 1.05 and a combat power index of 105. This meant he was already on the cusp of meeting the university standard. Even if he could never enter that dream again, He could secure a spot in a second-tier martial arts university after the entrance exams, which were only 200 days away. But Luwen's ambition no longer stopped at just passing. He now aimed for the day he becomes strongest. He felt acutely how bright his future had suddenly become, all thanks to a dream from a few hours prior. After completing the test, Luwen rushed home, eager to dive back into that dream world and uncover more of its secrets. What? I can't fall asleep? Luwen sat up, completely bewildered, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He glanced at the clock and decided to try some pre-sleep exercise, naturally choosing the 24 forms of body refining, a routine he once dismissed as the 13th set of radio exercises. It was a perfect time, as his blood chi value had seen a significant jump and needed to be properly consolidated. Luwen began moving through the 24 forms of body refining, a sequence he had performed countless times on his yoga mat. As he practiced late into the night, it wasn't long before he sensed that something was off. Wait, how am I moving like this? Luwen froze mid-motion, a look of utter confusion on his face. A moment ago, he had distinctly felt his body subconsciously executing a completely different sequence of movements, a sequence he had never been taught. The realization dawned on Luwen almost instantly. He understood the source of this anomaly. He had absorbed the martial arts memories from those two uniformed zombies. He hadn't just gained their combat skills and experience. He had inherited the very memories of their training, and driven by curiosity, Luwen decided to attempt the body-refining technique he'd seen in the memories of the two uniformed zombies. He mused to himself that the movements were significantly more complex than the technique that had kept him as one of the weakest, boasting over 200 distinct forms. Some of the postures seemed impossibly difficult, but with the memories he inherited, it was as if he had already practiced them countless times, making them feel second nature to perform. The moment Ling executed the first form, a peculiar part of his body began to tingle with a sensation like a mild electric shock. The feeling was unbelievably pleasant, like a wave of pure warmth was spreading through his veins. It felt so incredible he almost cried out loud. It was as if Ling had just discovered an entirely new world of power. Instantly, he became completely engrossed in practicing the demanding technique. At that moment, if a second person had been in the room, they would have witnessed Lu's body continuously contorting into one bizarre posture after another. Yet, these movements were linked together with an unexpectedly fluid and wonderfully harmonious sense of grace, even as Lu's body trembled slightly throughout the entire process. At last, Ling performed the final movement. His entire body gave out, collapsing onto the yoga mat as if it were about to fall apart. Then, an intense, ravenous hunger flooded his brain. Didn't I just eat dinner a few hours ago? Ling was astonished, as the gnawing emptiness in his stomach constantly reminded him that his body was now in desperate need of a massive energy infusion. It became painfully clear that regular food would not be sufficient. He needed high-level elixirs to fuel his journey as he becomes strongest, but the cost of these potent medicines was enormous, and he immediately recognized the urgent need to find a way to earn money for his cultivation. After that transformative night of training, Ling woke the next day and headed to his martial arts combat class at B High School. As he approached the sports gymnasium, Lu Qiming rushed right past Ling, only to hold the locker room door open for him. The two were supposed to be sworn enemies, but suddenly one of them had been reduced to a mere follower, and Lu Qiming didn't even seem to notice, acting as if this new dynamic was the most natural thing in the world. Ling, have you lost a lot of weight? Inside the dressing room, Ling and Lu Qiming began changing into the required gear for their actual combat class. When Ling took off his shirt and pants, he revealed a lean, powerful body with the sharp, clear-cut definition of a cheetah. He had indeed grown slightly slimmer, a result of his blood vitality rapidly increasing while he was undernourished. I need to get my hair trimmed, he thought. Ling gazed at his familiar yet strangely unfamiliar face in the mirror. His once plain eyes were now deep and dark, and from them occasionally flashed a glint as sharp as a knife's edge. Now, even when he just stood there calmly, he projected an inexplicable aura of pressure. After changing, Lu Xing and Lu Qiming walked into the martial arts hall together. The entire martial arts hall was immense, divided into several large blocks of padded fields. Each of these fields was essentially a self-contained classroom for a practical combat class. They were obviously not the only group using the hall during this time slot, so Ling and Lu Qiming found their class's designated area and quickly walked over. Everyone was sitting in a circle around the edge of the mat, facing a middle-aged man with a robust physique and muscles that strained the fabric of his loose uniform. A man in a martial arts uniform stood firmly in the center of the training hall. This is the practical combat class. I trust you have all consolidated what I previously taught you regarding the fundamentals of combat techniques. The instructor for this practical combat class was named Zhang Jinga, an official level 2 martial artist, rumored to have seen real battle and gone toe-to-toe with an otherworldly beast. The massive scar on Zhang Jinga's deliberately exposed right arm served as the ultimate proof of his experience. It was also his most prized possession, a war story he had recounted to his students on more than one occasion. With the introduction over, Zhang Jinga began to formally demonstrate various combat maneuvers, calling upon a familiar student to act as his sparring partner. From Ling's perspective, the fighting techniques taught by Zhang Jinga were simplistic and crude compared to what he had learned in his dreams, which were infinitely more brilliant. He always asked Xiangyi to go up. Can't he ever pick from the ordinary students and give one of us a chance? Unbelievable. Ling suddenly heard a bitter complaint whispered by Lu Qiming beside him. Only then did he truly take notice of the boy Zhang Jinga had summoned to assist with the combat demonstration. The boy's name was Yangi. He hailed from a wealthy family, his martial arts scores were consistently at the top of his grade, and combined with his handsome appearance, he enjoyed considerable popularity throughout the entire school. Even if you were given the chance, you couldn't block it. Even with his power held back, Instructor Zhang's strike is not something just anyone can withstand. Luing glanced at Lu Chiming and stated indifferently. Lu Chiming's face reddened as he muttered, "Who asked Yangi's family to be so well off? He gets all sorts of supplements with every meal. I heard his blood chi value is already approaching 1.2. Luing didn't engage him further, calmly watching the demonstration, pondering the vast gulf between these drills and the true path where one becomes strongest. Zhang Jinga and Yangi continued their display. Lu Chiming wore a look of unconvinced resentment, as if certain he could perform even better than Yangi if only he were given the same environment and resources. On the surface, Luing appeared to be listening intently, but in reality, he was preoccupied with the details of his scholarship application and strategizing how to bring the matter up with his teacher. Finally, the demonstration concluded. Zhang Jinga stopped the drill and casually addressed the student beside him. "Yangi, don't step down yet. Find another person to practice with." "Yes, sir," Yangi replied nonchalantly, clearly accustomed to receiving such special treatment. "Is there any student willing to come up for a friendly spar with Yangi?" Zhang Jinga's voice boomed across the hall, and wherever his gaze landed, students did their utmost to shrink away or avoid his eyes. No one. Zhang Jinga's brow furrowed, a hint of dissatisfaction on his face. Every time it came to actual combat practice, these students cowered like frightened animals, proving why the weakest among them were destined to stay that way. How was he supposed to teach them if they buried their heads in the sand? He knew many of them whispered that he was biased toward the top students in the class. But those people never stopped to think about the reality of the situation, because every single time an opportunity like this arose, aside from elite students like Yangji, how many others actually dared to step forward and accept his personal guidance? So many of them loved to complain about their lack of opportunities, yet they failed to grasp that opportunity slips through their fingers precisely because of their repeated cowardice. Zhang Jinga's gaze swept over every single student, a wave of disappointment washing over him. Just as he was about to force the issue and pick someone at random, his eyes suddenly met a pair of dark, profoundly deep eyes. Zhang Jinga's own eyes lit up, his attention locking onto a slim student with an unnervingly calm expression. Amidst a sea of averted gazes, one pair of eyes met his directly, their intensity both striking and sudden. "Okay, you there, the student who dares to meet my gaze. Step forward and spar with Yan Fei," Zhang Xin commanded, pointing at the distinctive student. A nearby classmate whispered, "Luing, Teacher Zhang is calling you." "Huh?" Snapped out of his thoughts, Luing suddenly realized that he had been summoned by Zhang Xin to come up and be Yan Fei's sparring partner. The students around him all glanced at Luing with cruel anticipation, eager for the spectacle about to unfold, and even Lu Chiming offered a look that screamed, "Better you than me." For students considered among the weakest, like him and Luing, being singled out by the instructor was as likely as winning the lottery. It seemed Luing's luck had just run out, being chosen as a demonstration dummy in practical combat class, as a sparring partner. Nevertheless, he rose and strode toward the center of the field, approaching Zhang Xin. He offered a calm greeting. Zhang Xin's eyes, however, noticed the powerful, well-defined muscles rippling with strength beneath Luing's short sleeves, and his expression couldn't help but brighten with interest. How could I have overlooked such a promising specimen in my own class before? Zhang Xin surveyed Luing from head to toe, a pleased look on his face, and asked, "What is your name?" "Luing. And what was your score on the last blood chi value test?" Luing paused for a moment before replying truthfully, 0.802. "Only 0.8? That's shockingly low, practically among the weakest." "That can't be right." Zhang Xin frowned. "Have my eyes deceived me?" He shook his head, deciding not to dwell on it, and gave his instructions. "Spar with Yan Fei. Utilize the martial arts techniques I've just demonstrated, and after it's over, I will critique any flaws in your form. Understood?" Luing simply nodded, then walked over to face Yan Fei. Yan Fei's expression was utterly relaxed. He gave Luing a slight nod and offered a condescending reminder. "My blood chi value is already 1.22, so I might hit a bit hard. You should be careful." Luing offered no reaction beyond a casual nod. "Here I come," Yan Fei bellowed, launching himself forward like a cheetah straight at Luing. Even Zhang Xin, observing from the sidelines, couldn't help but nod in approval at the display of skill. As for the other students watching, they were all prepared to be impressed by Yan Fei. Lu Qiming turned his head slightly, casting a look of worry toward Luing. Yan Fei closed the distance with a cocky smirk, planning to end the match in a single blow as his fist neared Luing's face. But then his entire expression warped into one of pure shock. To his utter astonishment, Luing moved with blinding speed, effortlessly dodging the punch and instantly assuming a counteroffensive stance. Yan Fei's mind couldn't process what was happening right before his eyes. He froze, dazed. In that moment of hesitation, Luing's fist connected squarely with his face, and a figure went flying. A body was launched from the center of the field, soaring a good 5 to 6 meters before crashing hard onto the ground. A dead silence fell over everyone. Every single person stared, their eyes fixed on the center of the field with expressions of pure disbelief. They all looked at Luing as if in a trance, and Yan Fei, writhing in pain on the ground, couldn't believe what had just happened. Ling, with just one move, had sent Yan Fei a prodigy with a blood chi value of 1.2 and a top 10 ranking flying. It felt like a dream. This is how a nobody becomes strongest. Zhang Xin's voice boomed, silence, as he rushed forward. The field became unnervingly quiet, and as for Ling, he just stood there. Ling stood with immense dignity in the center of the field, seemingly without having moved an inch. All eyes were fixed on him, as if they were gazing upon a monster. Even Zhang Jingge was momentarily stunned before a sudden realization dawned on him. He had indeed not misjudged Ling's potential. Quickly, get 2 people to carry Yan Fei to the infirmary. Zhang Jingge barked out the order, and only then did the other students snap out of their daze and spring into action. A few of them carefully placed Yan Fei onto a stretcher and rushed him away. Teacher Zhang, Ling began, trying to explain to Zhang Jingge that he hadn't intentionally ignored the fighting techniques he had been taught. The truth was, when Yan Fei charged at him, his raw combat instincts had taken over, driving him to react on pure reflex. By the time he could even think to engage in a proper spar, Yan Fei was already soaring through the air. Who could have guessed his opponent was so fragile? Zhang Jingge stared at Ling intently for a moment before saying, "That's enough. You, come with me." His shoulder, gave the command, and strode out the door, completely disregarding whether the practical class was officially over. Ling had no choice but to follow obediently. The moment the two of them left, the training field erupted in a cacophony of excited chatter. What in the world just happened? Is Ling on some kind of performance enhancer? How did he get so strong? That's the same Ling, right? The one we all thought was the weakest. Yan Fei's blood chi value is 1.22, yet he was utterly defeated. What in the world is Ling's blood chi value now? Lost in a sea of awe and speculation, one student's mouth hung open as he stared dazedly in the direction Ling had disappeared. He was utterly baffled. Upon entering the office, Ling's eyes fell upon a meticulously cared-for bonsai tree and a combat power testing device. You told me your last BQV test was 0.8, didn't you? Does any part of what just happened look like the work of a 0.8? Zhang Jingge had just ushered Ling into the office and was now staring at him with an intense, burning gaze. Ling felt a bit helpless and explained, "Teacher Zhang, you specifically asked for my last time's test result." For a moment, Zhang Jingge was rendered completely speechless. And after a moment of thought, he declared, "We're testing you again, right now." Ling simply nodded and placed his hand on the machine's sphere. A surge of energy pulsed from the sphere as it began to measure Ling's blood chi value. After a few tense moments, the results appeared on the screen. It displayed a staggering blood chi value of 1.532, officially qualifying Ling as a rank 1 martial artist. As Zhang Jingge was reeling from this revelation, he was jolted by a loud crash. Bang! Ling, in the process of testing his combat power, had completely shattered the assessment machine, which in turn obliterated the precious bonsai tree sitting behind it. Zhang Jingge was devastated at the sight of his favorite bonsai now in ruins. He turned to Ling with an incredibly complicated expression, a look that was almost impossible to put into words. It was a mixture of profound shock, yet tinged with undeniable joy. There was a hint of astonishment within that joy, laced with traces of doubt and sheer disbelief, doubts about his own judgment and doubts about reality itself. It was a truly complex gaze. "When was your last test?" Zhang Jingge asked, taking a deep breath to compose himself. Ling considered the question for a moment before replying, "The last official monthly test, so a little less than a month ago. However, if you count a private test I took, it was about a week ago. Less than month times ago?" Zhang Jingge was at a loss for words. This boy's journey as he becomes strongest was happening at an impossible speed. His power had already surpassed the standard for a level 1 martial artist. Mr. Jingge eagerly questioned if he hailed from some renowned martial family, or perhaps had been secretly tutored by a grandmaster. To his utter astonishment, Ling revealed he was not from high society, nor had he. While receiving training from a grandmaster, Mr. Zhang reflected on his own past, recalling how he had managed to become a level 2 martial artist before he ever joined the military. He remembered the harsh lessons learned on the battlefield, where he was forced to accept that people like him were among the weakest when confronted by monsters. The sheer, overwhelming strength and power of those beasts were far beyond what normal martial artists could handle. The only individuals capable of standing against them were an exceptionally rare few. They were individuals blessed with heaven-defying talents, wielding a kind of power that was impossible for ordinary people to even imagine. After witnessing Ling's aptitude, Zhang Xinu considered him equal to those legendary geniuses, the kind of person who eventually becomes strongest. This boy was, without a doubt, a combat-type martial arts prodigy. At that very moment, an incomparably strong conviction formed in Zhang Jingge's heart. Zhang Jingge just about managed to compose himself. "With your current scores, you are more than qualified to apply to the school's top class." Zhang Jingge wisely chose not to ask for the reason Ling's BQV had nearly doubled in a single month's time. It simply wasn't worth asking. "Teacher, I think it's perfectly fine for me to stay in my current class. There is no need for me to change," Ling replied calmly. Zhang Jinu nodded, his expression a complicated mix of emotions. He also felt there wasn't a need. The cultivation of BQV relied entirely on the students' own efforts, and what the school's teachers could offer was merely some skill in practical combat. "In that case, if you have any requests that you believe the school can help you with, you may ask for them now," Zhang Jing inquired. Ling had been waiting for this exact opportunity. "I want to apply to the school for the martial arts scholarship. and I would also like to receive more free time at school. Luing presented the two ideas he had been considering. The second one had just occurred to him. Luing had consistently felt that for the person he was now, staying in school was becoming a waste of valuable time. If he could have more time to practice his body refining techniques and explore the dream world every day, his path to where he becomes strongest would accelerate dramatically. I will apply for a 30,000 yuan scholarship to the school on your behalf, and you should be able to receive the money within 2 days. The school will hold a meeting to discuss the matter of your free time, but there shouldn't be any problems with that either. After all, you are a genius. A genius ought to have certain privileges, Zhang Juna promptly responded. In addition to that, I can promise you, if you achieve a high ranking in the city while representing our B number 3 middle school in the college entrance exams, the school will provide you with an additional, substantial reward. Zhang Jinga wore a formal expression as he said this, as if he now viewed Luing as a true equal. Zhang Xinyu then took out his bank card and offered it to Luing, advising him to use it to cover his needs until the school's scholarship was issued. Luing was hesitant to accept it, but Zhang Jinga insisted he pay it back once he received the scholarship funds. Thank you, Teacher Zhang. I am very thankful to the school as well. Luing expressed his sincere gratitude. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first, Teacher Zhang. I understand. Zhang Jingguo nodded. Yes, you can go. A few moments after Luing left, Zhang Xinga, who was sitting in his chair, suddenly shot to his feet. The calm on his face vanished completely, replaced with an intense surge of sheer excitement and triumph. Luing, my B number 3 middle school has actually produced someone like Luing. I'll keep him as a secret weapon right up until the college entrance exam. After it's over, I will thoroughly taunt those from number 1 and number 2. Thinking about the high school tournament. Haha, I'm already getting excited just imagining their faces. Inside a shop named Martial Medicine Hall, a tall teenager in a school uniform stood gazing at the items displayed on the counter. A scholarship was on its way, and Luin was already planning how he would invest every single coin. It wasn't a matter of him being unable to restrain himself, mentally spending the money before it was even in his hands. Instead, he was consumed by the urgent need to improve his strength, determined to no longer be among the weakest. Zhang Jinga had assured Luin he could secure him a special scholarship from BHA Third High School for the sum of 30,000 yan. Luin had initially considered this a small fortune, but as he browsed the prices, he realized that amount would be utterly insufficient. To be a martial artist from a poor family in this brutal martial arts era was an incredibly difficult path. Luin was also struck by the immense weight of the burden pressing down on his parents. Lu Qingge was right. With her genius-level martial arts talent, if only she didn't have a mediocre brother like him to drag her down, her accomplishments would already be far greater than they are. It was just like the situation with Hao. Lu Hai had decided to provide both him and Xinyo with 2 sets of blood nourishment tonics each month, which was the absolute maximum the Lu family could afford. If all 4 of those sets were given to Lu Qinyo alone, the results would naturally be far more pronounced. As he considered this, his determination to earn money became even stronger. For my own cultivation and for my sister's martial path, I must work harder, he resolved. Luin did not linger any longer and promptly walked out of the mall. At that moment, a group of high school students in their uniforms and carrying backpacks jostled past Luin, rushing headlong into the nearest internet cafe. Something stirred within Luin. Just a month or so ago, he was no different from them, drifting through his days at school and then the internet cafe. After school, he had been like a fish in murky water, blinded by his surroundings, muddled and just flapping in place every single day, with no direction and no motivation. Luin felt as if he'd been trapped in a tiny fishbowl, powerless to break free. But now that he had finally broken the surface, his mind was crystal clear. He knew exactly what he wanted and could see the path that lay before him. Do I have any regrets? Luin asked himself quietly. None at all, he answered firmly, his eyes filled with resolve. In that very instant, countless martial arts memories suddenly flooded Luin's mind. A massive cascade of fragmented images flashed before his eyes. In that moment, he felt like he had grasped something profound as an internal barrier shattered completely. Luin's mind became incomparably clear, and a new level of understanding blossomed within his heart. A breakthrough. Luin stared down at his hands, lost in thought for a moment. He could clearly feel that the plateau he had hit with his hand combat and fist techniques, after absorbing so many memories, had just been completely shattered. At this moment, his understanding of fist techniques had ascended to an entirely new realm. It was a state that was difficult to put into words. The current Luin felt that he could now perfectly master any of the fist or hand combat techniques stored within his mind. He could execute the most appropriate response for any situation he might face. A clear heart and a clear mind, this phenomenon is known in the world of martial arts as an epiphany. Did I just experience an epiphany? Luin wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. He only knew this was the next step on the road to where he becomes strongest. He reasoned that the funds from Zhang Jin should translate into another leap in his power. With this in mind, Luing purchased the Abusan device and some restorative tonics for his sister before hurrying home. Once there, he didn't waste a moment. He plunged back into the dream world to continue his training. Across the gray, mist-veiled wasteland, 2 figures were locked in a fierce exchange. Luing's adversary was a zombie clad in a blue jumpsuit, a far more formidable foe than the ones he faced before. The gray-suited zombies were nothing compared to these. They possessed superior strength, speed, and even retained vestiges of their former fighting skills. The one before him was a prime example, letting out a low roar as it stretched out its brawny arm to violently seize him. The limb sliced through the air with a menacing whir, yet Luing's gaze remained unshakably calm as he took several abrupt steps forward. He expertly used his shoulder, pressing it against the zombie's massive arm to deflect the blow. In a flash, he reached out, wrapping his arms around the creature's neck from an unorthodox angle and yanking it downwards with immense force. His knee shot out like a cannonball, connecting squarely with the zombie's jaw. The impact was devastating. The blue jumpsuited zombie's head snapped back at a grotesque angle, lolling lifelessly behind its shoulder. After a final tremor, it collapsed to the ground. Its form rapidly decayed, releasing a thin wisp of black smoke that darted swiftly into Luing's body. As Luing's eyes reopened, signaling the absorption of its memories, he knew the reward was significant. This elite blue jumpsuited monster had yielded a substantial harvest. After integrating the memory, Luing felt his understanding of hand-to-hand combat ascend to a new level. He was no longer the weakest fighter he once was. Absorbing memories from countless zombies provided a secondary benefit beyond just accelerating his martial arts mastery. With the clues gathered from one memory after another, Luing was slowly piecing together a path that led directly to the legendary base 1359. This has to be the right way, he thought. If he continued, he would reach the base, and that day didn't feel too far off. The path ahead was still veiled in gray fog, with the occasional stumbling figure emerging from the mists. With a determined gaze, he strode forward into the familiar wilderness. Almost immediately, a sturdy zombie was the first to spot Luing, pouncing on him with a guttural roar. Without a moment's hesitation, Luing charged forward to meet it. He parried and struck. In a mere two-move exchange, the zombie, which was clad in some unidentifiable style of clothing, had its neck decisively snapped by Luing. As he finished another zombie and began absorbing its memories, his gaze was suddenly arrested by an incredible sight. Luing watched as the dense gray mist began to part, flowing away like water from the path directly ahead of him. The silhouettes of crumbling yet magnificent structures were slowly being revealed by the receding fog. Finally, Luing breathed, "I've made it." The legendary base 1359. His journey to become strongest had led him here, but he remained exceptionally calm and cautious, knowing the unknown often hides great danger. He ran like the wind toward the base. His speed was incredible, yet his footsteps were almost silent. At last, Luing arrived at the foot of the colossal city. He concealed himself behind a ruined wall, looking up to survey the metropolis before him. This majestic city was finally revealed in its full glory. It was nearly impossible to describe the sheer scale of the city that now loomed over Luing. He had to crane his neck to its absolute limit just to barely see the top of the city walls. The entire city was encircled by walls that towered into the clouds, reminding Luing of a certain anime he had seen. It featured giant, towering walls that protected a city from the onslaught of evil giants in his previous life. Compared to the walls in that show, these were considerably taller, making the city from the outside resemble a huge, broken bowl. It was full of cracks, fractures, and peeling layers, and the debris he leaned on was just one insignificant piece knocked off that dilapidated structure. It was difficult to imagine that any power in this world could have torn open such a solid line of defense. Seeing the sight with his own eyes, he realized the scenes of destruction he had witnessed in the memories were but a 10,000th fraction of the actual devastation. This was base 1359. There should be at least 1,000 more similar bases like this one. Where are the rest of them? Are they still standing? What exactly have the people of this world endured? And are there any survivors left? A storm of doubts brewed in Ling's heart as he took a step towards the giant city, feeling as though the truth was waiting for him there. As he explored the city within the walls, Ling's eyes were drawn to a towering building. That must be the command center. Within its walls, he caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a master. Huh? What is that? It must be a zombie. As he took a peek at the corpse sitting inside, an immense surge of killing intent targeted him directly. The very air itself seemed to thicken with this imminent danger, and the lethal energy made him feel like the absolute weakest being alive. The pressure emanating from the command center even shook the depths of Luing's soul, causing him to collapse and retreat backward in fear. What the hell was that? What a terrifyingly intimidating force. That was not a place he could go with his current power. He had to survive if he ever becomes strongest He knew in his heart he shouldn't linger, so he walked all the way to the inner side of the wall, where the city's reality was presented before him. All kinds of tall buildings and streets were present, their style drastically different from the real world where he had lived. After his repeated experiments, he discovered that the safe distance between him and the zombies was about 10 meters. As long as he did not get closer than 10 meters to the zombies, he wouldn't be discovered and attract their attention. Lu slowly closed the distance toward a gap, all the while maintaining careful vigilance to avoid all the zombies roaming around. After roaming for some time, Luing finally found a residential building, randomly picking a house and walking into it. There was no one inside. The house was separated into several small rooms, but the overall space was compact. A table was placed in the middle of the living room, with some dishes and tableware lying scattered upon it. The house contained no presence of zombies, making Luing guess that under that horrible black fog, the weakest ordinary people might not have even been qualified to turn into zombies. Finally, Ling found a palm-sized, gray-colored disc less than half a centimeter thick. It was on a desk with traces of writing left on it. Titian Hang Technologies. Ling put his hand on the disc, trying to check if it still worked. After waiting for about a minute or so, just as Ling was about to give up, he heard a ping sound. Then, the disc in his hand began to emit a faint blue light, which became more and more vibrant. Although the light wasn't blinding, its azure glow seemed to breathe life back into the dusty, silent rooms. "Welcome to Chenang Technologies," a gentle female voice emanated from the disc as the blue light began to rapidly coalesce into the silhouette of a woman. "I can't believe it's still working," Ling thought, a surge of excitement coursing through him as the female figure materialized in front of him. He was momentarily confused, wondering, how do I even operate this? Ling hesitated, but almost instantly, the azure beauty before him smiled and explained, "First-time users of the optical mind can operate it according to the provided instructions and guidelines." Thank goodness for a newbie guide, Ling thought, breathing a sigh of relief. He quickly mastered the operation method under the device's intelligent guidance. "All right, next step is to slowly gain an arty understanding of this world," he mused. Taking a shallow breath, he formulated his command, "Help me search for information and news from the most recent date." The device responded, "Connecting to Skynet. Connection failed. Connecting to base 1359 civilian database. Connection successful." In the next moment, a deluge of information flooded past Ling's vision. Whenever his eyes focused on a line of text, the image would instantly expand, presenting the corresponding date. Ling began to quickly browse through the news articles presented by the optical mind as a torrent of shocking information assaulted his senses. A level 10 powerhouse, the planetary migration plan, a patriarchal meeting. Just as Ling suspected, this world's martial civilization was far more advanced than his own. They had even explored realms beyond the 9th and 10th levels of cultivation a long time ago. But despite their quest to become the strongest, the most frequent news Ling saw was of the fall of one martial arts base after another. July 12th, year 11,024 of the martial calendar, base 105 has fallen. September 30th, bases 114 and 893 have fallen. The World Martial Alliance will hold its 274th Patriarchal Conference at Main Base 1. This world's martial civilization was enlightened beyond comparison, yet they faced an enemy that made even their most powerful warriors feel like the weakest. Even masters of the 10th and 11th levels couldn't protect the human race, which was steadily failing against the onslaught of the foreign beasts. Ultimately, they were forced to abandon their home planet and search for a new home among the planet stars. As he absorbed this tragic news, Ling's gaze lowered, and the stream of blue light scrolling before him began to slow. The exploratory ships launched on that desperate mission never returned with any news, not even after base 1359 had fallen. Ling felt a sense of mourning for them. What he witnessed in these messages was the helplessness and sorrow of a glorious civilization on its battle path to extinction. Ling paused his review of the news and related data, then commanded, "Pull up information on this world's history." The device responded, "Retrieving information on world history. Information on world history. Retrieved successfully." Ling turned his attention to the newly presented information. Year 1 of the martial calendar. In the northern region of the ancient Eagle Kingdom, the eastern and southern parts of the ancient Lion Kingdom, and the western part of the ancient Dragon Kingdom, the earth itself cracked open, and hordes of otherworldly creatures crawled out from the chasm. As he read this first line of the world's history, it felt as though Ling's mind was struck by a heavy hammer, shaking him to his core. He suspected he had misread it, leaning closer to read each word carefully. In year 34 of the martial calendar, the world's first martial. The World Martial Alliance was formed in the same year the ancient Dragon Kingdom was born. Ling's mind went blank as he collapsed to the ground, all strength leaving his body. Normally, he met challenges with either calm resolve or righteous fury, but not this. This time, his expression was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He frantically scrolled through the initial centuries of this world's timeline, only to find it mirrored perfectly what he had studied in his own history lessons. The dates, the iconic figures, the major events, they were all identical. A horrifying, unbelievable conclusion began to form in Ling's mind. This wasn't some alternate reality. This world and his own were one and the same. The records he was viewing weren't the history of a foreign martial civilization, but rather the stark, unwritten future of his own world, a staggering 10,000 years from now. The blood drained from Ling's face. He simply couldn't accept this truth. "It can't be," he whispered. "It has to be a coincidence. A parallel world, maybe." He desperately tried to rationalize to calm the storm in his soul. In a frantic search for any discrepancy, Ling attempted to examine the finer details of the historical records, but the optical mind flashed a cold, impersonal message. Insufficient authority. Visitor cannot access query. A deep frown creased Ling's brow as he commanded, "Generate user ID." The response was immediate. "Please provide a genetic blood sample." This optical mind was a marvel of technology, demanding something as personal as a blood sample for registration. Ling wondered if such a process could even function within this dreamlike state. Before he could ponder further, the AI pricked his index finger, and a single drop of his blood was taken for analysis. The system began its work, and after the sample was accepted, the optical mind fell completely silent for over 10 agonizing minutes. Just as Ling started to think the machine had malfunctioned, it finally emitted a single, sharp chime. However, the message that appeared wasn't for a new user ID. Instead, it read, "Human genetic blood sample detected. Fireseed program initiated. Connecting to Fireseed repository 1359. Connection successful. Permission granted." In the next instant, a massive data file materialized before Ling's eyes, and at its very top was a photograph of himself. The picture showed a handsome, rugged, middle-aged man with a face that was hauntingly, undeniably familiar. It was him, an older version of himself. With a forced calm, Ling began to read the biography laid out beneath the image. It started with his graduation from B City's 3rd high school, followed by his enrollment in B Martial Arts University, where he placed first in the school and 23rd in the entire city that year. 3 years later, he graduated and enlisted in the military, eventually being assigned to the Tonin Military Division. The next line hit him like a physical blow. Died on the battlefield in the Southern War Zone, August, year 334, at the age of 37. It continued, never married, highest military rank, lieutenant. Commendations, first class battle merit 3 times, second class merit 5 times, and third class merit 12 times. And then, the most damning summary of all. No outstanding contribution. At the very bottom of the profile was a character history rating, a paltry 2 stars, which perfectly explained his level 2 access to the Fireseed repository. Ling drew a sharp, ragged breath, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. It was becoming impossible to deny that this was the grim future that awaited him. Before the unchangeable weight of history, his own path to *** becomes strongest, *** seemed like a joke. His incredible transformation from being one of the *** weakest *** to a true genius hadn't caused so much as a ripple in the flow of time. To be precise, even after all his struggles, even with his metamorphosis, the vast Fireseed repository didn't label him a genius, because in the world's 10,000-year history, there had been prodigies 100, even 1,000 times more gifted than him. The number of true geniuses was simply staggering, leaving legacies that echoed through entire eras. Yet, those who started as the weakest and rose to the top were legends few and far between. Ling murmured to himself, according to this data, my performance in the upcoming college entrance exams will be a blood chi value of 2.12 and a combat power index of 257. In the practical combat assessment, I'm predicted to rank 23rd and just barely get into BHA Martial Arts University. If I completely ignore the dream world and the accelerated growth I'm experiencing from practicing both the body refinement and breathing techniques, along with every other boost I have, then achieving that result would be considered normal after practicing for over 200 days. However, when I factor in the cultivation and the immense gains from the dream world, my true numbers should eclipse what this data shows. A fierce light suddenly erupted from Ling's eyes. More than 200 days of dedicated cultivation, over 200 days spent inside the dream world, and more than 200 days of unparalleled accomplishments. I refuse to believe I'll remain among the weakest with such pathetic progress. Ling clenched his fist with unyielding force. No, I will amount to far more. Since this is the future, it can be rewritten. My own future can be changed, and so can the future of all human civilization. If humanity is destined to perish in the future, then I, Ling, will be the one who changes history and becomes strongest to save everyone. Ling stared at the words Fireseed repository glowing blue on his optical screen and declared with calm certainty, I am the spark that will ignite a world-changing inferno. In that instant, all the disillusionment, confusion, and despair in Ling's heart were completely incinerated, replaced by an unprecedented wave of determination and confidence. This was his new creed. The following day, Ling awoke and joined his family for breakfast. Ling, why aren't you in your school uniform? Don't you have to go to school today? Xin Yuan asked with curiosity as she set a pot of breakfast on the table, noticing his casual attire. Ling nonchalantly grabbed a meat bun and nodded. That's right, my teacher said I can opt for self-study at home from now on. They allow that now? Xin Yuan muttered, a hint of suspicion in her voice, but she didn't have the energy to dwell on it. Juggling several part-time jobs, she had to rush off to work right after breakfast, leaving no time for further questions. Lu Qingge, by habit, was about to open her mouth and retort with something sharp, like, since when did our school have a rule like that? But one look into Ling's intense eyes made her swallow her words back down. This guy, Ling, had just taken a bite of the bun right from her hand. His recent transformation was becoming more and more pronounced. He was no longer the timid, mediocre boy she once considered the weakest person she knew. Before, she only felt that he had become somewhat deep and mysterious. But today, Ling exuded an aura like an unshakable mountain, a piece of unyielding iron, a raging fire. Just sitting beside him, she felt an oppressive pressure that almost took her breath away. This feeling was overwhelming. Ling, however, seemed oblivious to her discomfort. He finished his breakfast quickly and headed straight out. He returned to his room, intent on practicing the body refining technique, but just as he stepped inside, his cell phone chirped to life, displaying an unknown number. Ling, your scholarship is ready to be dispersed. Please come down to the school this afternoon to collect it. It was, unsurprisingly, a call from Zhang Jinu. Understood, Mr. Zhang. Luing replied. By the way, why were you absent from class today? Didn't I mention the school needed to have a meeting to discuss your attendance? Because you insisted on keeping this from your parents, I had to go through your classmates just to get your phone number. Teacher Zhang, Luing cut in, I have very little time, and I can't afford to waste a single moment of it. He didn't care whether Zhang on the other end understood his new resolve or not. Luing simply ended the call. Ever since returning from the dream world the previous night, Luing's entire mindset had undergone a radical transformation. Before, he was content with carefully concealing his true strength, afraid of revealing too much and letting others see his potential. Now, he repeatedly practiced the body refining technique, seamlessly pairing it with the breathing method, pushing himself over and over. His sole purpose was to completely wring out every last drop of his energy, to induce a state of utter exhaustion and force his entry back into the dream world. It was only when Luing completed his 27th repetition of the body refining technique that he finally collapsed, his muscles screaming as he lay limp on the floor. He was unwilling to even twitch a single finger as a wave of slumber crashed over him. His path to become the strongest had no room for rest. He had to ascend as quickly as possible to find the power needed to rewrite the future. He couldn't afford to waste even a single moment. When he next opened his eyes, he found himself in the exact spot he had left yesterday, the ethereal optical mind hovering before him. Luing skillfully interfaced with the optical mind and issued a command: display all cultivation methods, insights, and notes pertaining to the martial arts that are accessible within my current authority level. Instantly, a staggering amount of information materialized before Luing's eyes. It was a dense and overwhelming archive, with every single entry related to martial arts, representing more than 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge. This was the inspiration of countless individuals and their collective wisdom. Even though Luing's authority was only at level 2, the repository of knowledge he could access was simply massive. Luing considered this before issuing another command: filter the data for the potter's most suitable exercises and methods for even the weakest level 1 martial artist, along with any other relevant content. The system responded, screening in progress. The vast library of content was rapidly filtered, leaving only 3 distinct data files remaining. The Stellar Body Refining Technique. Introductory chapter, authored by Wang Yi, a legendary level 11 powerhouse from the World Martial Alliance, which was later integrated into the Fire Seed program. Next was the Natural Breathing Technique, introductory chapter, created by the master known as Yo, another level 11 powerhouse of the World Martial Alliance, also subsequently incorporated into the Fire Seed program. And finally, the Crystal Contemplation Technique, introductory chapter, authored by Danon Fo, yet another level 11 powerhouse from the World Martial Alliance, and it too was incorporated into the Fire Seed program. The names of the techniques were impressive, but it was the information about their creators that made Luing's heart pound in his chest. Level 11 martial arts powerhouses. In the current era, the world's strongest martial artists had only reached level 9, yet here before him floated 3 distinct legacies from level 11 masters. Even though they were only the introductory chapters, their value was so immense it was nearly impossible to quantify. Luing then noticed a common annotation on all 3 techniques. Incorporated into the Fire Seed program, Project Humanity's strongest should have foreseen the ultimate destiny of our species, yet they were powerless to alter their own fates. Their only option was to consolidate the very essence of their legacies, hoping that a successor would one day discover their knowledge and carry the flame forward. Luing could only let out a deep sigh. How unfortunate for them, they could never have imagined that the one to inherit this fire wasn't a descendant, but an ancestor from an era long past. The very first thing Luing began to practice was the Stellar Body Refining Technique, alongside the Natural Breathing Technique. The Stellar Body Refining Technique conceptualizes the human body as a miniature universe. When mastered to its deepest levels, the technique would trigger a profound transformation, propelling muscle density to a terrifying level, a key step for anyone who becomes strongest, and unlocking unimaginable potential for both strength and defense. His BQV would skyrocket, blazing with the intensity of a celestial river of stars, the moment Luing finished emulating the final posture from the pasture. Stellar Body Refining Technique, his entire body was instantly seized by an uncontrollable tremor, as if struck by a bolt of lightning. An incomparably intense wave of pain and numbness surged through every fiber of Luing's being like a violent, raging tide. Even the most minute muscles and meridians, down to the very tip of his little finger, were brutally stimulated and forged anew. This agonizing sensation persisted for more than half an hour before it slowly subsided, giving way to an unparalleled feeling of relief. Luing found himself completely immersed in the profound pleasure of cultivation, so much so that his very soul seemed to transcend, as if he were having an out-of-body experience. If the effect of the body refining technique he had practiced previously was a mere one, then the effect of the Stellar Body Refining Technique combined with the Natural Breathing Technique was 1,000 times greater, or perhaps even more. The effect of his old body refining technique, the 24 basic forms he had been practicing until now, seemed completely negligible in comparison. It was a method for the weakest, simply no better than a common radio calisthenics routine. Luing was absolutely ecstatic. He immediately shifted his focus to the Natural Breathing Technique. The Natural Breathing Technique, when performed in conjunction with any martial art, was said to allow the practitioner's cultivation progress to skyrocket. Furthermore, this technique could enable a martial artist to enter a state of celestial unity, a condition that offered incomparable benefits for advancing one's martial arts realm. Using this method, one could absorb various elements directly into their body, which in turn would dramatically increase the speed of their cultivation. Lewin meticulously followed the first sequence of the natural breathing method and began to draw the surrounding fire elements into his body. A short while later, he opened his eyes. After completing just the first set of the natural breathing technique, he felt as if a raging inferno was burning within him, constantly purging the impurities from his system. After just a single set of these exercises, Lewin went completely limp, slumping to the ground, unable to move a single muscle. Seizing the opportunity during his forced rest, Lewin began to attempt the crystal contemplation technique. The very concept behind crystal contemplation was both marvelous and mysterious. This technique, which served to purify the mind and fortify the will, delved into the most enigmatic aspect of martial cultivation: spiritual power. The initial step required the practitioner to visualize a perfect human form within their mind, one sculpted entirely from flawless crystal. This crystal human form, it would start riddled with impurities, but with each breath, those weaknesses would be meticulously purged, bit by bit, until finally, a flawless state is achieved. While Lewin couldn't fully grasp the profound concepts taught by the crystal contemplation technique, he understood one fundamental truth: spiritual will is the bedrock of martial cultivation. A warrior with an unbreakable will, free from distractions, will always surpass one with a lax mind, who might as well be the weakest of them all. This holds true for both their combat prowess and their cultivation speed, which is why so many practitioners in the martial arts world dedicate themselves to such arduous training. However, while the crystal contemplation technique was undeniably magical, the difficulty of mastering it was immense. Having also acquired the tonic prescriptions, Lewin decided it was time to return to reality. What a stench! The moment Lewin's eyes opened, a potent, fishy odor assaulted his senses. He sat up and discovered his entire body was coated in a black, oily sludge, which was the source of the foul smell. Even though I only practiced the stellar body refining technique within the dreamscape, some of its effects had clearly manifested in the real world. After figuring this out, Lewin rushed to take a shower. My blood chi value must have risen again, but I wonder by how much. After emerging from the bathroom, his hair still damp, Lewin glanced at the wall clock and thought, it's almost time to head to school. Next time, give me a heads up first, Zhang Xinggu chided, handing Lewin a bank card. A hint of dissatisfaction colored his tone. I understand, Teacher Zhang. Though he seemed ready to say more, Lewin's unusually calm demeanor made him hold his tongue. Just go. From now on, just be sure to report to school at least once a week. Zhang Xinggu waved his hand in resignation. Yes, sir. Lewin pocketed the card, turned and walked away. Watching Lewin's departing figure, Zhang Xinggu felt a strange sensation. If he had to put it into words, the Lewin from before was like an open book, utterly transparent. But now, the boy felt inscrutable, a puzzle he couldn't begin to solve. This profound transformation had occurred in the span of a single day. Zhang Xinggu shook his head. It was best not to dwell on things he couldn't comprehend. Finally, I have some funds to work with. Stepping out of the office, Lewin felt a sense of relief for the first time in a long while. He knew he couldn't just buy pre-made supplements with this money. That would be a complete waste. The most efficient path was to purchase the raw ingredients and concoct the tonics himself. The Fire Seed repository contained numerous tonic and medicinal formulas he could use on his journey to become strongest. Naturally, his optic mind presented him with various options, but the ones that would actually be suitable for his current level required more careful consideration. Soon, Lewin narrowed it down to two specific tonic formulas. The first was the spiritual muscle and blood strengthening soup, and the second was the marrow nourishing pill. With his decision made, only one problem remained. Where am I going to brew this? Even the simplest tonics required professional-grade equipment. The slightest deviation in heat or dosage could ruin the entire batch, or worse, acquiring a full set for himself was simply not practical. The money he just received wouldn't even come close. It would be better to rent a facility, Lewin thought, feeling a bit distressed. Surely, there had to be institutions equipped for medicinal preparation or pharmaceutical research that he could use. I could approach larger pharmacies and pharmaceutical corporations, but the question is, why would they ever rent to me? Forget it. I'll just purchase all the herbs necessary for the spiritual muscle and blood strengthening soup and then devise a new plan. Sir, are you being serious? This is completely out of the question. Seeing the pharmacist's grim expression, Lewin simply got up and left. That was the seventh establishment to reject him. This entire approach isn't realistic. Lewin, having just emerged from the pharmacy, let out a frustrated sigh, his face a mask of helplessness. He had already successfully purchased all the herbs needed for the spiritual muscle and blood strengthening soup, and had even secured several extra portions as a precaution. The task of renting a mixing room, however, was proving to be an exceptionally complicated affair. Lewin had been to 7 pharmaceutical companies, and all of them had turned him down flat. If this doesn't work out, leaving me feeling like the weakest petitioner, my only option is to buy some rudimentary equipment online and make the attempt myself. Lewin's eyes settled on the 8th pharmacy that came into view, and he contemplated his next move. This particular pharmacy had a signboard that read Xing Shan Tang hanging over the entrance. It was quite a rare thing to see a store with such a traditional name in Bias City. It was certainly uncommon here. Ling straightened his attire and stepped inside. The pharmacy wasn't large, there were just a few cabinets displaying various medicines. A young man in a white coat was slouched behind the counter, completely engrossed in his phone. Counter. When he heard the sounds of Ling entering, the youth briefly lifted his head to look at him before his attention snapped right back to the screen. You can look around and find what you want, then come back here to pay for it. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, don't even think about grabbing anything and running. This store is monitored, and the cameras are of excellent quality. After delivering his warning, the youth resumed his intense focus on the phone. Ling's eyes flickered for a second. At every other pharmacy he'd entered, the staff, even those with a bad attitude, would at least politely come over to ask him a question and see what he needed. The clerk at this store, by contrast, was simply ignoring him, showing no desire to conduct business whatsoever. Ling strode to the counter and reached out, firmly pressing his hand down on the phone in the youth's grasp. Are you looking for death? The youth's anger began to flare as he tore his eyes from the screen, but the instant he met Ling's gaze and felt the compelling aura radiating from him, his aggression evaporated. What do you want? The youth quickly took 2 steps back, looking at Ling with a trace of fear, his eyes glancing at the phone still pinned under Ling's hand from time to time. Ling stated calmly, I have one question for you. Does your pharmacy have its own mixing room? And what if it does? So what if we do or we don't? Aren't you just here to buy medicine? The youth retorted. Ling extended a single finger and lightly tapped the glass counter, saying indifferently, if you do, I'd like to propose a business deal. This isn't just about medicine, it's about forging the path for one who becomes strongest. 5 minutes later, Ling was following the young man to a room at the back of the pharmacy. The youth's expression was now somewhat nervous. He repeatedly tried to confirm the details with Ling. You've agreed to pay 200 yuan an hour, and even if you use it for less than an hour, it will still be counted as a full hour's charge. And at most, I can only let you use it for 3 hours. After 3 hours, you're done. Also, you have to pay the 200 yuan up front. Fine. Ling very dryly took out 200 yuan and handed it to the youth. The youth's eyes lit up at the sight of the cash. He took the money and hastily stuffed it into his pocket, then produced a key. He opened the door and instructed Ling. All right, head on in, but be careful not to damage anything, or the cost will come out of your pocket. I'm aware, Ling replied, walking confidently into the room, while behind him, the youth pretended everything was normal and swiftly returned to the storefront, his face glowing with a barely concealed, triumphant glee. Ling surveyed the room, his eyes revealing a glimmer of satisfaction. While the mixing room wasn't large, it was fully equipped with all the essential apparatus he would need to begin his work. Ling donned the white pharmacist's uniform, secured his mask, and began to meticulously follow the recipe for the spiritual muscle and blood-strengthening soup, preparing the required herbs. One by one, he carefully laid out all the ingredients, refining each according to the prescription's precise instructions. The first component was a green lizard, which Ling placed inside an activator to meticulously separate the scales from its flesh. Next, he took the condensed moonstone and began refining it into a pure liquid. Finally, he employed a laser beam to slice the tree roots with surgical precision. This preparation phase was the most critical and demanding part of the process. For someone who started as the weakest every single step toward gaining power was paramount. The task was more tedious than a standard chemical experiment, but not beyond his capabilities. Ling carefully decanted the boiling medicinal concoction into a flask. I never imagined it would be a success on the very first attempt, Ling mused, observing the soup as it gradually cooled within the flask, transforming into a beautiful, light green hue, a spark of joy igniting within him. The concoction was a success, but the true test would be in its effects. Without hesitation, Ling removed his mask and directly drank the entire flask of medicinal soup. The liquid coursed down his throat and into his stomach before he could even register its taste. He stood perfectly still, and after a few seconds, he felt a scorching heat erupt from deep within his body, spreading through his entire system in mere moments. Every single muscle cell in Ling's body began to greedily absorb this potent heat flow, like parched earth finally receiving a sudden downpour, or a sun-baked sponge being plunged into cool water. A faint white vapor began to rise from Ling's skin as his blood qi surged, filling him with a sensation of overwhelming fullness. 10 minutes later, this intense feeling gradually receded and finally vanished. This was the first true step on the path where one *** becomes strongest ***. Ling's eyes shone brightly as he stared at the empty flask in his hand. He knew, without a doubt, that he had succeeded. The effect of the spiritual muscle and blood-strengthening soup was far more potent than he had anticipated, proving to be over 10 times more effective than the blood-nourishing tonic he had used previously. Yet it had cost him twice as little to create. Ling could already feel that his muscles had become noticeably tougher and more solid. Bang! 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 Just as he was lost in this triumphant revelation, a sharp knock echoed from the lab's door. Ling opened it, his expression unreadable. Didn't you promise not to disturb me while I was working? The youth stammered. My boss is almost back. You need to get out of here. Now. The young man at the door wore a panicked expression, urging him to hurry. Ling, however, remained unfazed and said nothing. He efficiently cleaned the mixing room, secured his newly created soup, and calmly exited. Meanwhile, Ling Su dragged her exhausted body from her vehicle. At only 20 years old, with a delicate frame and a gentle face, she should have been in the prime of her life, blooming like a flower, but instead, she had been forced to shoulder the heavy weight of her family's responsibilities far too early. The He family pharmaceutical business was an establishment with a rich heritage, having been their livelihood for several generations.